On this episode of the College Football Show, I'm going to talk about Nico Iamaleava, my spring playoff prediction, what teams are about to be descending, and what coaches I think might be on the hot seat. Living human being last week, you heard all about the situation at Tennessee with Nico Iamaleava. But for those of you who had your head in the sand, let me give you a quick refresher. So, Nico Iamaleava, he decided that he wanted to renegotiate his NIL contract with Tennessee, and it was estimated he was receiving around $2 to $2.5 million a year for his time at Tennessee thus far, and he wanted to up that to $4 million a year, which was roughly in line with some of the quarterbacks who had entered the transfer portal. Carson Beck from Georgia, for example, it's estimated he's making around $4 million a year at Miami. So Nico and his team looked around and said, well, why shouldn't we have that? Now, if you want to talk about his performance, then that's totally an acceptable answer whenever we're discussing the situation now with college kids when they're making this much money and using these kind of negotiation tactics. It's absolutely fair to discuss whether or not their performance on the field warrants money to the extent of $4 million. But before I get there, so Nico Iamaleava, so they wanted more money. It's reported that they were threatening to opt out of the playoff. They, being Nico and his team, were threatening to opt out of the playoffs this past season, which is crazy. But they wanted more money, so they were going to renegotiate. The spring portal window's coming up this Wednesday. So they wanted $4 million. Tennessee was holding out. So Nico was advised by someone to sit out practice, and that resulted in him being booted off the team at Tennessee. Now, this is a tactic commonly seen in the NFL where there are guardrails in place. In college football, there's no guardrails for this stuff. In the NFL, whenever they want to renegotiate a contract when they're coming up, to the end of it, they say they don't want to risk injury, so they're not going to practice, they're not going to play, because if you're a great player, if you've had a great career in your rookie contract, up to that extent, whenever you're about to sign an extension, you don't want to risk injury, because if you get injured, on the field of play, then you're potentially costing yourself, tens of millions of dollars. So they opt out of practicing and out of playing until they get extensions, because they know if they get hurt, they're not going to make as much money, all of that work that they've put in. But there's guardrails in place. There's sort of a structured approach to this in the NFL. In college football, there's not. And so, regardless, that's the strategy that Nico was advised to follow. Now, whether it was agents or, family members, whoever it was advising him, they didn't give him very good advice. And it's hard to believe that it was Nico himself coming up, with this approach. But regardless, Tennessee said no. They didn't want to pay him $4 million, so he didn't show up, to practice, like I mentioned. They kicked him off the team because, in the world of college football, that's not how things are supposed to be handled. So I want to start and give a little grace to Nico to the extent that we can. It's easy to drag him, his name through the fire in this, but he was obviously clearly poorly advised in this situation by whoever it was. So it's an unfortunate situation because it's been a PR nightmare. He's got a lot of baggage now wherever he goes. His name's been dragged through the mud by, Tennessee fans, rightfully so to some regard, not so much in another sense, but he's kind of gotten, in a sense that seems to be the consensus, as he's gotten what he's deserved PR wise. It's not good for Tennessee because, the guy that you've built your whole offense around, and there's a lot that Tennessee did for this kid in NIL and lawsuits to, keep him eligible. The frustration is real. It's warranted. But, they're still without their starting quarterback now, the guy that they built their offense around. They're going to have to probably address, at least for depth in the portal. But unless they're probably going to be tampering with some quarterbacks, and they can't come from the SEC. That's another part of this, is Nico can't transfer within the SEC, and they can't tamper. So if you're a fan of an SEC team, consider yourself safe from Tennessee tampering. But anyone else out there, if you have, a young or a proven commodity at quarterback, you're probably going to, you might want to worry a little bit, because they have a couple $1 million now to go spend on a quarterback. So unless they just want to add a depth piece, they're going to have to go find someone, and it's going to start to, that transfer portal market's going to start moving. But the situation for Nico is not good because he still needs to be developing. He still needs to be focusing on development. He needs to be focusing on that year 1 to year 2 jump that we see quarterbacks make all the time. And with skipping practice, with transferring somewhere else and going into a new system, you're losing valuable time and resources that you could be putting towards development and developing yourself into a better player and a better quarterback to, one day be drafted to the NFL. Ideally, that's what everyone's goal coming into college football is that you're going to be drafted. So you need to focus on that. So he's losing valuable time, valuable development. He's going to have to learn a new system. That's going to take more time. It's just he's not going to, in the short term, it's going to affect his long-term plans, but in the short term, maybe someone does, buck up and pay him $4 million, but who knows how, this is going to result in his, how it's going to change his future, what it's going to look like down the line. There is an important detail that this morning he was crystal balled to North Carolina, so the situation out there with Belichick is if that is where he ends up going, and it's a 24/7 sports crystal ball, if that's where he ends up going, North Carolina is a lot more intriguing to me now if that's the case, but I'll take a quick sip of water here. So will this become a bigger trend? I think Tennessee did the right thing. They kind of set the precedent in a sense. If there's any other players out there that are thinking of, using this sort of tactic, hopefully the way it played out for Nico, maybe they consider a different approach. This isn't, a lot of people, seem to think this is the first time. Remember this past football season, UNLV, Matthew Sluka, quarterback there, after 3 games in, he decided he wasn't going to play anymore because he had not received an amount of NIL that he was promised, supposedly. So this situation with Nico, it's the first time it's happened in this exact sense, but, this past football season, we had a quarterback at a program in the Mountain West, and they played for the conference championship. It's not like they were a bad team. Who was the quarterback for them left because he wasn't getting what he claimed he was promised, 3 games into the season. So kind of similar in that regard to this, but this isn't necessarily the first time it's happened. I just wanted to get that point across. Matthew Sluka, he did end up transferring to JMU on, looks like back in January. But as for Tennessee, it's easy to talk about Nico's performance and how it was lackluster. You did still have a 10-3 season. You had a good season. The over-under, I thought this was interesting. The over-under for Tennessee was at 9.5. Since Nico's departure, it dropped to 8.5. So that your schedule, let me remind if anyone that doesn't know. So you got Syracuse, ETSU, Georgia, and UAB. So you've got, depending on how Syracuse turns out, you've got a relatively challenging schedule with those 2 games, and then you go to Mississippi State. You got Arkansas, at Alabama, at Kentucky, Oklahoma, New Mexico State, at Florida, and Vanderbilt. So it's going to be a bumpy schedule. Hopefully Tennessee can work. If you don't find a quarterback, at least add a depth piece and work over the summer and in the fall and get your quarterback tuned up to start the season. But it really is just kind of a crazy situation that we haven't seen it play out exactly like this, but like I said, the UNLV, Nico, his stats from 24, if you're interested, 63.8% completion rating. He passed for 2,616 yards. His TD to INT ratio was 19-5. So, he wasn't a bad quarterback by any means. Not the greatest out there. He wasn't elite either, but was he worth $4 million? Probably not. So I think Tennessee, they made the right decision here, but that doesn't mean that they're not going to pay a price in the long run. So now that I got the Nico Iamaleava situation out of the way, it's hard not to talk about something like that if you're a college football show. But moving on. So last week I talked about teams that I think are in ascension mode. So teams that are going to elevate tiers, are going to have a better season this coming year, to by a couple steps, not just they win one more game, but maybe they win the conference. Teams in ascension mode. The inverse of that, so teams that are descending or in danger of descending. I wanted to talk about that. Just one team in each conference. So I want to start in the SEC. So this is just teams that may not achieved the level that they did last year by, a couple games for sure. Maybe their performance on the field. You watch them and they're just compared to last season that they don't play as well. They're off. They're not as efficient. They make more mistakes. It's just you can just tell in their play. It's not just a record based thing, but overall, I want to start in the SEC. Teams that are in danger of descending. I think Ole Miss is one of the teams that's going to be in danger of this. I think it's a real likelihood that they're not going to live up to the potential that they had last year. So I think they might have missed their window. If you're an Ole Miss fan, I think that you missed your window. And what I mean by that is you spent a couple of years, you had a couple of really good seasons, 10-win seasons. You built up a roster. You spent a lot of money in NIL to acquire portal pieces like Walter Nolan out of the portal from A&M on the D-line. You had a really good quarterback in Jackson Dart. Both of those pieces you're replacing, by the way. But you spent a lot of money. You got a lot of good players, and you're kind of expected to make the playoff last year because for a couple of years before this, you were in that final top 12. So the first year of the expanded playoff, you just have to be a top 12 team. You've done that. Here we are. It didn't happen. So I think you missed your window. A lot of that, your returning production, it's something that I talk about this a lot. So when I say it should be taken in a sense with a grain of salt, it might feel silly to then go on talking about it, but it is an important thing to look at. You just have to kind of temper your expectations for what it actually means. So if you are a team like, historically, like Alabama, there would be years where they're 120th in returning production. They come back and they go win the SEC because their recruiting and their development was at an elite level. Is Ole Miss to that level? We'll find out. I don't think so. That doesn't mean that they're terrible, but I just don't think that they're at that elite level of recruiting and development to continually be a perennial contender. You're going to have a couple of years of building up and build up to that level of 9-10 win seasons, and then boom, you have a date, 2024, this is our year, we're going to go to the playoff. You missed it. So 113th in returning production in the country. That's also last in the SEC. 111th on offense and 104 on defense. Your total defense last year, you were 14th. In your total offense, you were second. So you had really good high-level packages on both sides of the ball. You were really good on defense. You're almost only Ohio State was better than you on offense. I believe that's correct. Actually, no. Ohio State had the number one defense. Scratch that. Regardless. So Ole Miss is looked at as a transfer portal, live by the portal, die by the portal. Lane Kiffin, he's the transfer portal king. They're actually not, horrible. And, well, let me just go through it for you. Recruiting from high school. So this is in the SEC. You're in 2023, you're 10th, 11th in 24, and 9th in 2025 in the portal. So this is in the country for the portal. You are 3rd in 2023, 1st in 2024. So that's part of the reason why I said 2024 was your shot. That was your window. But then again, you're 3rd in 2025. So the reason I go through that is high school recruiting, that's that's typically what you want to look at whenever you're building, and as you look year over year to see if you're able to stack, class on class on class and build into a good program. But if you get a lot from the portal like Ole Miss, it's not as important, I think, to go back 3 years. It is to some extent, but players are more in and out the door when they're portal players. But you've stacked some good portal classes. You've had some lower end in the SEC recruiting from high school classes. But so returning production worse than the SEC. You live by the portal, you die by the portal. We're still kind of waiting for Ole Miss to see how this experiment plays out. It's with each year that Lane Kiffin and the Rebels win 10 games, it seems more and more like he's just himself. He's figured out the portal. There's other teams that, they're up and down with it. Florida State, for example, you live by the portal, you die by the portal. We saw that they won the ACC in 23 and then 2 wins in 24. So I can easily on their schedule, their over under win totals 8.5, and I can easily see 7-5 on the schedule for Ole Miss. So you start with Georgia State, then you go to Kentucky, which they beat you last year, but you should win that game. And then you play Arkansas and Tulane, and then you got LSU, Washington State, at Georgia, at Oklahoma, South Carolina. You play the Citadel, Florida, and then you finish up at Mississippi State with the Egg Bowl. Your strength of schedule per ESPN, so take it for what you will. Your strength of schedule per ESPN is ranked 23rd in the country. That always is that number could change. It could go, way up if, LSU, say Zach Calzada in Kentucky say they're good. Say LSU's, they're elevating. Maybe Tulane is a good team. Let's say Oklahoma, they're rising. So this could easily become a much harder schedule as the year, plays out and we see, what teams are and they're different from what we expect them to be. So because of that, and I think that is likely the case if you believe the Oklahoma propaganda, for example, there's some teams on your schedule that they're going to be a lot better than they were last year and you're losing a lot of production. So I think the Ole Miss, you're threatening to descend. Maybe you don't, but I think that you're at least, and by descending again, I don't mean you're going to go from the season you had last year where you went 10-3. I don't mean you're going to go, like Florida State and go 2-10, but 7-5. I think that's a clear, you've fallen off from the level that you were. So next up, I want to go to the ACC. Take a quick sip of water. So the ACC, similar vibe here in a way. So it seems like for the past couple of seasons, we've seen a team that just kind of comes out of nowhere. TCU being one. The expanded playoff has helped with that. But for the ACC, I think teams that are in danger of descending, I got SMU. So let's look at I want to start at their recruiting like I tend to do with this. So in 2023, you weren't in the ACC, but if you were, you would have had the 14th ranked class. In 2024, you would have had the 17th ranked class. And then in 2025, you are looking at number 6, the transfer portal. You in 23 were 13th, 24 you were 32nd, and in 2025 you were 36th in the portal. So if you want to look at that, you can say, well, hey, we were 32nd in the portal last year, and we went to the playoffs. We played for the conference championship. That's fair, but again, are you gonna do that again? You haven't had great recruiting in high school. You are 78th total in the country in returning production. You were top 30 in both offense and defense. So if you're a little better, in returning production, I'd have higher hopes. But you're losing a lot. You're losing over half the team on both sides of the ball, at least the team that produced for you. So if you have, if your development is where you want it to be, it's easy to, the ACC is not as, no disrespect to the ACC, but you're not as deep, you're not as talented as the SEC or the Big Ten. So you can kind of, this level of recruiting, you can kind of get away with it a little more in that conference, but I think that teams just in general are not going to be as the perennial contender that we see. I think that's kind of going away. So if you're SMU, yes, you have a lot of resources, but I think that you're not going to be a perennial contender, at least right now, in this moment of time. So define descending, I'll do that. 11-3 last year. I think you can go. Your over under is 8.5. I think you can win 8 games. That's that's not the level that fans there are going to want to see. That's not going to feel like you're moving in the right direction. Again, some of that comes down to how you win or lose these games. But from 11-3 to say 8-4, it's going to be tough to watch. If you just went to the playoff, you're going to be disappointed. But you exceeded expectations year one, that's for sure. So one key about this is as we come up kind of in the with rev share, if that all kind of plays out how we expect it to. So in the ACC, you're not making the full amount that other schools are. That was part of the agreement with SMU joining the ACC, is they're not going to make the full amount. So it's estimated that the rev share per school is going to be about $20.5 million. From the ACC, you're getting about half that at $10 million. So SMU, you have a lot of resources, and from your boosters. So I wouldn't imagine it would be too big of an issue for you, but that's just something to take note of, is that you're not making as much from your TV deal. Your recruiting, you're not built for Power Four perennial success. If you look at your schedule, it's not it's not a crazy stretch, but you've got East Texas A&M University, so that's a new. They actually rebranded. Who was last year? I don't remember who they were last year, but that's just they rebranded. Then you got Baylor, you go to Missouri State, at TCU, then you got Syracuse, Stanford, at Clemson, at Wake Forest, and then you play Miami, at Boston College, Louisville, and at Cal. So the back half of the schedule is definitely more challenging than the front half. So I could see a world where you get through the Stanford game and you're, let's say, three, could be, let's say, 1 win, 2, 3. It could be 5-1 probably, and then you hit that back half of the schedule and you come out 7-5 on the other end of it. We see that sort of thing happen all the time in college football. But I just think that with the exceeding expectations in year one, with the lack of recruiting, I think that SMU is just kind of, I think you're built to fall this year. Doesn't mean you're going to go 5-7 or anything, but I think that you're going to be descending. Don't forget, if you're enjoying this podcast so far, then make sure you follow the podcast, subscribe on YouTube, follow me on Twitter. It's Campus Pigskin on Twitter. The College Football Show. I enjoy it. Let's go. So I've got to be kind of intentional with how I frame this hot seat talk. So I want to say that I don't, job losses, I don't like to talk about that lightly. That people always, the head coach of a program, he's always the face, whenever he gets fired. But, and, the head coach, the coordinators, they make millions of dollars. They're going to be fine. But the firing of a coach, it impacts a lot more than just the head coach and the coordinators. It impacts, their kids, who, they may have little kids and they have to move to a new town, a new state, and a new school. So they don't care that, daddy makes, $7 million a year. They care, that they have to leave their friends. Lower level staff, analysts, all that, they, are out of a job a lot of the time. So firing a coach, I don't, it's not like a giddy thing to talk about. I don't want it to come off as a giddy subject, but it is something that's interesting. It's interesting to, a lot of fans find it interesting. I think it's interesting to just kind of talk about, to think about. It always, it impacts, again, it's not just that coach getting fired, but, that place is going to go hire someone. So then, you got the whole coaching carousel, and it's always interesting to follow, to see who winds up where, how they can, it's always a test to see how a coach, if they're able to turn a program around. So, and a lot of these coaches, like I said, they're paid a lot of money. And so with much is given, much is expected. So I want to start, and this, I'm not saying that this coach is going to be, say, fired if they, 3 games in or whatever. I'm saying that what coaches may not be necessarily on the hot seat right now, but if they have a rocky season, that temperature could be turned up, and come, the end of the year, maybe we're talking about them as, maybe they are fired. This is also going to include some coaches that I think are on the hot seat, but in general, let's start out in California with Lincoln Riley. He's one that's widely, talked about maybe as being the next high profile, tier 1 type of job that comes open, because he's been there for a couple of years, and the last 2 seasons, record-wise, they've regressed. 2023, they were 8-5, and last year they were 7-6. So part of this discussion, you should look at some things, what is next year going to look like for them. So 97th in returning production, but I won't go any farther into that. Their over-under is 7.5. So a big thing here is the strength of schedule. ESPN has that rated as the 20th in the country right now. So you're coming into a season where you've had continuous poor results defensively. That's always a big thing with USC is and Lincoln Riley in general is that he's really good as a coordinator, as a quarterback coach, but he just doesn't care about or can't figure out defense. And it's proven, true at USC. He's taken steps to address that, but we didn't, the last, game one of last year, I was watching them play LSU, and I thought, man, they figured out defense. This is going to be a great team. We're in for something here with Lincoln Riley. And then as the season went on, that thought was proven to be wrong. They ended up, falling off 77th total defense in the country. So they were not really great last year either. They lost a lot of games. You're over under this year, like I said, it's 7.5. You're not expected to win any more than you did last year. So Lincoln Riley's contract at USC is $10 million a year. It's a private school, so it's a little hard to get an exact number, but it's estimated as buyout, I believe, from looking into it, is going to be around $80 million. I think that's what it is. So are they going to pony up and pay that if they have another bad season? Depends, I guess. To find bad season, it depends if they win 7 games, but who are the 7 teams they beat? How'd they play in the games that they lost? You can have the same record but still be a lot closer year over year than your record indicates. So moving on to the SEC, Hugh Freeze at Auburn. Auburn is known that they, like many schools in the SEC, they are one of the least patient. They have coaching turnover all the time, and it's hard to be an Auburn fan and a coach at Auburn, especially whenever you had Nick Saban at Alabama for as long as he was, and your biggest rival is beating you every year. It's going to be hard to keep a job. But Hugh Freeze is a coach that has, thus far, he's not really, he's recruited really well. You got to give that to him. They've recruited really well. They've recruited the state of Alabama really well. But that has yet to translate into wins on the field. In his last 2 seasons, 2023, they were 6-7. They regressed last year. They were 5-7. So the talking point around Hugh Freeze is turnovers. His quarterbacks threw 13 interceptions last season, and bringing in Jackson Arnold, who he threw 3. He was benched at Oklahoma though, and didn't play a full season, but he did throw 3 in his time there. So it's always a talking point around him is you're bringing a turnover-prone quarterback into a system with a turnover, a coach that has players. His system is turnover-prone. So they've got the 15th. Looks like their strength of schedule is rated 15th. So you've got a tough schedule to deal with. So again, here, if we're seeing turnovers left and right, if they're being embarrassed on the field continually, if they're not winning games, if they're not beating their rivals, then, especially when Alabama has a new coach, so your coach at Auburn now is more tenured than your rivals, and if you're not going to be able to beat them, then, what are we doing? So it looks like he's currently making around $6.5 million a year, so his buyout will be whenever at the time, if he were to be fired, it would be 75% of his remaining contract would have to be paid in the form of a buyout. So that is one team to watch if they start the year and it's not going well. That is one school to watch, see what they do and see if that job comes open. Continuing in the SEC, moving down a little farther south, we got Billy Napier at Florida. I thought that Billy was going to be fired last year. I remember after they lost to A&M, there was I think it was on 24/7, maybe ESPN. It was something out there that said that boosters had raised the money to pay for his buyout, and it was there was some dark days down there for him, I'm sure, and his staff. But I thought he was going to get fired. I think a lot of them did too, but they didn't fire him. They showed restraint. They were patient, and that ended up, that turned out pretty well. Clearly, the AD down there saw something in that program and in those players because they did not pull the trigger, and they went on and they had a good season there last year. With the way they finished, they went 8-5. I say good season just compared to how they've played in the seasons prior. 8-5 is not the standard or the expectation at Florida, and it shouldn't be. But compared to the seasons before that, it's a good year. This season coming up, they're over under win total 6.5, and their strength of schedule is ranked number 2 in the country. So you've got that to tangle with if you're Billy Napier. Fortunately, I think that Florida is in ascension mode, and I think a lot of the teams on their schedule are going to be taking a step back. So I think that, by the end of the year, we're going to look back and say, that wasn't probably the second hardest schedule in the country. Kind of like what we did last year. We get to into the season, we find out Florida State's going to be terrible and that sort of thing. You also picked off a couple teams you weren't supposed to, if you're Florida, and I think you'll do that again. Again, I think that they're in ascension mode, and some other teams are taking a step back. And if you had a few more things go your way, I think you might have had a couple extra wins, in the sense of your quarterback getting hurt. But so I'm not expecting Florida to fire the coach this next season. But if they come into the season and we have another 2023 type year, I think that old Sunbelt Billy is going to get the axe there in Florida. So staying in the state, however, but moving to the ACC, we have Florida State. So it's silly. 2 years ago, they're playing for the conference title. They're going 13-0, and everyone's shocked that they're not making the playoff back when it was still 14. And you're thinking, and then the Bama job comes open. Mike Norvell's flirting with that. Florida State gives him a big extension. You're thinking, no way, this guy's going to be here for the long haul. No way he's going to get fired anytime soon. We've got a great thing going. Let's give him a bunch of money. And then, boom, 2-10 next season. So because of that, it's hard to look at Florida State. If they have, I think we might have kind of a Jimbo-esque type situation here, in the sense that the fans and the athletic department, it's not working. You know that you probably need a new coach, but are you going to pay that buyout? It turns out in the case of A&M, yes, they decided that they wanted to win football games at whatever the cost, so they're going to pay him his money. Is Florida State going to do the same if we have another 2-10 type season from Mike Norvell? Well, that's a good question, and I unfortunately can't answer it because I'm not in that department, in the athletic department there, and I don't have to spend, around $60 million to buy out a coach. But he did restructure his contract for this season coming up. It looks like he's going to be $4.5 million from his contract is going to be given to their rev share. It's not a collective, but it'll be used for rev share if that does go through. So the athletic department will just repurpose that. Historically bad season in 2024. So if you go 7-5, you're probably not getting fired. Again, that's a lot better than 2-10, and you're going to hope that he's got the ship righted and we're going in the proper direction here. But if they go 5-7 this year, I think he's probably going to be on a pretty hot seat coming into 2026, and I'd say that'll be a make or break year. If I had to answer the question, I'd say they probably won't fire him, but the heat on his seat could get turned up to about as hot as it'll be for 2026 if they don't have a good show this year. So back to the SEC. Sam Pittman at Arkansas. This is an interesting one because Sam Pittman's kind of a beloved coach there and around the conference. The way his contract works is it's pretty modest, I guess, if that's the right word. He's making about $5.5 million a year, and it's set to expire in 2027. So if he has a 7-win season, that adds another year onto it. And last year they had a 7-win season. So the problem at Arkansas is that they consistently just play bad football. They eke out 6-7 wins a year, but they'll a couple games they'll play really well, and you think, hey, maybe this team's kind of figuring things out. Maybe that coaching staff they figured out the X's and O's and how that's going to work with this team, and then they play terrible for 3 games and lose all of the respect that they had worked to earn, kind of, at least on the field. Their average recruiting, you're 28th over the last 3 years. You have the 17th ranked transfer class coming in. Your strength of schedule, it's 3rd in the country. So it's kind of, player acquisition wise, you're not really looking at a team who's built talent wise to to win on talent alone, you're going to have to trust development and how hard they fight for you on the field. But the common question around Sam Pittman is, will he retire or be fired? I think that they would probably say, hey, it's time for you to retire, kind of, and just have him retire rather than fire him, just because of the way he's beloved by the fan base and everything there. And he's, it's, I'm not in his head, but it's hard to see him coaching somewhere else. So, Arkansas, will they fire or retire Sam Pittman? Depends. I think that, I don't think that they're going to go and win 10 games. I don't think that Arkansas is going to ever kind of compete for what they aspire to compete for as long as he's the head coach there. I think it's just a matter of time until he's gone. And I say that with respect. I like Sam Pittman, but, that's the reality of the situation. Ending this segment, we'll stay in the SEC, but we'll go over to Kentucky. Mark Stoops, you almost had it in the bag. You almost got the A&M job, but thanks to a revolt by the fan base, you find yourself coming off a 4-8 season at Kentucky again. You have one good year there, and they think that you're worth all the money in the world. They're paying him $9 million a year. His buyout, I think in June, will go down to about $3 million if I research that correctly. So you're coming up on a year where you've got the 8th toughest strength of schedule. Your average recruiting is similar to Arkansas. You're 28.3 in the last 3 years, and your portal class is 9th. So they've kind of tried to live by the portal, die by the portal at Kentucky. They don't really put a lot into high school recruiting. They just try to get guys in high school to kind of build a foundation and just bring guys in through the portal and develop them and win that way. And it looked like it was going to work for a while, but since you had that 10-win season, you've fallen 7-5 in 23, 4-8 in 2024, and you did not look competent in any realm last year, except against Georgia. You always find a way to make that one interesting, but you ultimately lost and had a horrible year. So Kentucky, they like to claim that they're a basketball school, but at what point is enough enough, and you decide that you want to win more than 4 football games? It's tough to tell, but his buyouts, it doesn't seem to be that large there. So I'd say that Mark Stoops is not just a coach I think he's probably near the hot seat already, and I think that by the end of the year, if we don't see some quality wins coming in, then I think that he may be out at Kentucky. So that's all for that segment. Again, I want to say I understand the implications for job loss, and I don't make light of it, but it is an interesting thing to kind of discuss. I'm not advocating any of these people be fired. I just, the way I see it, I think that those are the coaches that are most likely to find themselves, in that position this year. So it's only spring, but I don't know why I thought it would be fun to do some spring playoff predictions here. So I want to make it clear. I'll make official predictions later in the year once we're probably, through fall camp and closer to the season. But springtime predictions, it's something that's kind of fun to think about. So I want to say I'm coming at this from the perspective of best case scenario for each team. And don't hold me to this later in the year. Roast me in the comments once I post this on Twitter and on Instagram. But spring playoff predictions. So again, best case scenario. Number 1, I think we're going to have Alabama. I think that Kalen DeBoer is going to continue to elevate the offense there. The defense is going to be nasty, and they're going to win the SEC championship, and they're going to be back at the top of the pack in college football, number 1 in the rankings. Alabama. Number 2, Clemson, the ACC. I think that Clemson is one of the teams this year, kind of like Ole Miss last year, where they're kind of at the peak of their window. They're at the very top of where they've been building to get, and I think that this year they have a great opportunity to win the conference again and make a run in the playoffs. I see probably after this year, they're probably, the way they've been recruiting and the lack of portaling and all that at Clemson, I think that they're probably going to descend after this year. But right now, you're at the top of the mountain of what you've been building. You have a good opportunity, number 2 in the rankings. For number 3, similar thing with Penn State. Again, at the peak of their window, you're at the very top of what you've been building towards. You're going to win the Big Ten, and you're going to be number 3 in the rankings. And remember, the top 4 spots are for conference championships on this day, April 14th. It's, there's been some speculation that could change coming into this year, but but as of right now, it's the last season of this format. So number 4 spot, I think your Big 12 champion is going to be Texas Tech, and you're going to get the 4 spot in the playoff. So I think that Texas Tech, they're going all in for this season. You've got the number 1 portal class. I think you're in ascension mode. You're addressing the problems on defense through the portal. You're adding pieces on offense. You're going to come out with guns blazing in the Big 12, where it's basically anyone's ball game. And I think you're going to win the conference and find yourself at number 4 in the playoffs. So after the top 4, so now we got the at-large teams and then the G5, which I'll get to in a moment. But for the number 5 spot, Georgia, I think that Kirby, I think you're going to probably take a step back from maybe in a sense from where you've been at the top, but Kirby, you work your magic and you're going to be better than most in the SEC. Not the best, but better than most. You've got the best coach in the country there. You recruit really well. I think Georgia's going to find themselves in the 5 spot. Ohio State, reload, not rebuild. You backed your way in last year after losing to Michigan and going 10-2, but you got hot in the playoffs and you made a run and you won the championship. So this year you're gonna, with all that you've been doing on the recruiting trail and your development, you're gonna reload, not rebuild. I think that you probably finish runner up to Penn State in the conference, maybe behind Oregon. We'll see. I think those are the top 3 teams, but number 7, Arizona State. I think that you're number 2 in returning production from a talented team. I think you're going to keep the ball rolling in the Big 12, just narrowly losing out to Texas Tech, but you're still going to make the playoffs at the 7 spot. Oregon, similar thing here. You've got a pretty good schedule, a favorable schedule. You recruit really well. You've got a high-rated quarterback coming in. You don't have Ohio State or Michigan on the schedule. You do play Penn State, but the other 2 top teams in the Big Ten, you don't get them this season. So I think you're going to take advantage of that schedule. You're going to continue to develop these talented players, and you're going to find yourself at number 8. Texas, number 9. I think, even if Arch Manning played, just above average, right now, if on paper your schedule, it's easier in the SEC. And I think that conference is going to be in for some chaos this year. So Texas, you'll find yourself back up there. Even if you take a step back from last year, I still think you're going to make the playoff. Surprise team. So last year in the Big Ten, so this is the number 10 spot. Last year we had Indiana. I think this year you're going to have Illinois. You're coming off a 10-3 season last year. Your returning production is number 3. So again, returning from a pretty good team last year. Some of the best players in that conference, you're bringing them back. So Illinois, I got you at the 10 spot. Florida, welcome back to the party. Florida and Billy Napier. So this is just, I know I just talked about how I think, it's possible he could be fired. But that's just speculation. The other side of that coin is they're going to have a great season. And so I talked about last week, I think that they're in ascension mode. Again, if that turns out to be false, he's probably going to be fired. But right now, I think you're in ascension mode. So until we see them play on the field, I think Florida is going to be one of the teams in the SEC that makes the the playoffs. And like I said, chaos in the SEC, I think that we're primed and ready for that this year. So Florida, you're a team that'll benefit from that. Last but not least, Boise State. I think you're going to make a reappearance in the playoff. You're going to repeat your 9th in returning production. So let's keep the good times rolling. So again, this is all best case scenario. It's not an official prediction. It's just kind of for fun to talk about here in the springtime. All right, let's bring this thing home. Don't think I forgot about the big boys. Teams threatening to descend. Let's go over to the Big Ten. So, again, last week we did ascension mode teams. This week we're doing teams threatening to descend. USC. So I've got Lincoln Riley probably on the hot seat through this season, and one of those reasons is because I think that Southern Cal is they're going to descend this year, meaning, they didn't have a great season last year. I think that they'll replicate it or do worse. So again, returning production is an important number to look at. You're 97th total in the country, 85th on offense, which it's Lincoln Riley, so you don't tend to worry about the offense as much, but on defense, 108th, and that's from a defense that was 77th in the country. So again, what that means, what that tells me is you don't have players there year over year in the system developing, meaning you're probably not going to see progress next year unless supplement through the portal. Your recruiting's pretty good. It's not elite. It's not what you would expect it to be. It's pretty good. So I just don't think that the defense is going to show much improvement again this year. The offense, it's Lincoln Riley, the quarterback whisperer, as I kind of like to think of him, but you are starting a new quarterback this year. So you're recruiting in 23. If you were in the Big Ten, it would have been second in the conference, so that's good. But 2024 and 2025, you're in the fifth and the fourth spot. Your portal recruiting in the country, you were 19th in 24 and 19th in 2025. So again, you're recruiting pretty well from high school. You're just kind of supplementing through the portal, which is, fine if you're recruiting really good, but it's above average recruiting. You're not recruiting at an elite level from high school. You're behind the big boys in your conference. So that's not really what you want to see if you're USC, especially if you're, wanting to ascend, wanting to get back to the promised land, go to the playoffs, play for your conference championship, win a national championship. You're going to have to recruit better. You're going to need a better defense. If you can figure those two things out, you'll be all free selling into the sunset. But that's the problem, is you haven't figured them out thus far. Your over/under win total is 7.5. And again, last year you went 7-6. So it's, they're expecting they're not expecting any improvement. Your schedule, let's take a look at that. You got Missouri State, Georgia Southern. You go at Purdue, who I have as the worst team in the Big Ten. So you don't start with a super difficult schedule. Then you have Michigan State at Illinois. I think Illinois is going to be pretty good. Michigan, that's not going to be an easy out. You go to Notre Dame, to Nebraska. You play Northwestern and Iowa. You go to Oregon, and you play UCLA to finish up the year. So it's not, it's not a crazy gauntlet, but it's also not the easiest schedule in the world. So, you're not returning much from last year production-wise. You haven't been recruiting at a high level. So I think that USC, I'd say we're not in absolute worst case scenario, but I don't think things are trending in the right direction there, and I think that they're threatening to descend for this upcoming season. So finishing up, I I don't think that this one is crazy controversial. It's pretty easy to see how this team's descending. But over in the Big 12, Colorado, I think that we're gonna step back from last year. So you had a good year last year, a surprising year in a sense. There was a point where in late October where there was a clear pathway because of the way the Big 12 was playing out for Colorado to win the conference and make the playoff, which fortunately for, just for the conversation, that didn't happen. That would have been a crazy thing. But so you're recruiting. So Deion Sanders, he has this kind of, there's this idea around him that he's a really good recruiter, and because of getting Travis Hunter to go to Jackson State. But really, in the conference, in the Big 12, if you were in the Big 12 in 2023, not that he was there, but you're looking at 5th place. But last year, he's 16th in the Big 12, 4th this season for this cycle for 25. Your portal class, you were 8th in the country in 24, and in 2025, right now you're ranked 24th. So unless you make any big moves in the spring portal, you're not gonna, you're 24th in the country. Returning production is the biggest thing here. If you watched Colorado last year, forget about all the recruiting. You know how their players play. If you've watched them, you know that they won games because of Shedeur Sanders and the magic that he was at quarterback. So you're losing him and Travis Hunter, the literal winner of the Heisman, the best player in college football. And that's from a team that the latter half of the season is a different story, but really the latter half of the year is an outlier compared to how Colorado has played under Deion Sanders. The offensive line has not been good. If we look at your production from last year, so I want to get into that. So I said Shedeur Magic. You're 6th in passing offense last year. Your total offense was 69th in the country. You were 6th in passing offense. And you're rushing, you're last in the country. The literal worst team at rushing the ball in the country. So, like I said, poor offensive line play, the worst team at running the ball, and you're losing your quarterback that had you 6th in passing offense. I think that you're going to take a step back. You have Julian Lewis. He's a former 4-star recruit coming in at quarterback, so he's a talented player. He could have gone pretty much anywhere in the country he wanted. He chose Colorado. But regardless, you have not recruited well despite your reputation at recruiting. You have as far as Big 12 standards, you have a difficult schedule. So you got Georgia Tech for the first game, and I think that that's another team in ascension mode. I expect Georgia Tech to be really nasty this year. So that's going to be a tough game. Then you play Delaware. You go to Houston. It's, kind of TBD on them, but, they got Connor Wigman from A&M, a former 5-star quarterback. So Houston, they have potential this year. And you play Wyoming, BYU, at TCU, Iowa State, at Utah, Arizona, at West Virginia, Arizona State, and at Kansas State. It is a gauntlet in the, for a Big 12 schedule, it's a gauntlet. You have a really tough schedule this year. You're losing your best players. You've not recruited well, like I said, despite your reputation. So, again, the development piece, it's still kind of TBD in my mind to, see if Deion Sanders is able to assemble a staff of coaches that can develop players, and to get them to the, conference championship, to the upper echelon of the Big 12. But the being 69th in total offense and being last and running the ball and still being, top 100, it's crazy. That's just how good your quarterback was. But, and, like the game against Baylor, if you saw the way that ended, like there was money magic plays from Shedeur Sanders last year that won them games. And if you don't have that this year, you're going to fall back. You're going to descend. That's where I think Colorado is headed. Deion, he did just get a contract extension, so he's set there. They're not going to fire him or anything, but I do not expect a lot from Colorado this year. I think the conversation in Boulder, I think that kind of has the potential to get really toxic. But other than that, thanks for listening. This is the third show in, so if you want to find out about the teams that I think are ascending, go listen to last week's episode. But other than that, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, follow the podcast, and follow me on X, Twitter, Instagram, Campus Pigskin. Other than that, see you next time.